Welcome, Amy. Oh, and Sarah is here as well.
Got my team going to support me.
Welcome all in the chat. Would you like to say who you are, where you're from? Dia is already there. From De Montfort SU, Quality and Diversity Exec. And we have Sarah from University College Birmingham. The Guild, obviously, not the dark side. And we have Amy from Sheffield College Student Voice Coordinator, who is also an ambassador for the Young Trustee Movement. Okay, we've set it up so that everyone can talk if they like, but you'll need to come off mute if you want to talk. My name's John. I work at Coventry University Students' Union and we're hosting the SU Digital Summit. I'm very pleased to say that we've got Cassie O'Boyle talking to us today about Young Trustees movements. As we're not a massive group, please do, if you have a question, please do just ask, but there'll also be a space for questions at the end. Though I do ask, if you do unmute and ask a question, please do go back on mute afterwards. But over to Cassie.
Great, thanks. Hi, everybody. As John said, I'm Cassie, and I'm here today, I guess, with lots of different hats on, which we will talk about later on. But in my day job, I'm the representation and advocacy coordinator at UCB Guild. But outside of work, I'm also the trustee of a small community-based charity in Sutton Coldfield. And I'm also the East Midlands ambassador for the Young Trustee Movement. And I'm hoping that because I kind of have experience in lots of different areas related to trusteeship and student unions, that today will be particularly useful because I come at trusteeship from kind of an SU lens. I've also been a sabbatical officer, and during that time I was a officer trustee. And in my day job, I support some of the administration of my board. So that's a bit about me. I'm just going to introduce the Young Trustees movement. So we are just that. We're a movement of lots of different people, not just from the charity sector, but broader communities too. So we have got young trustees, current young trustees who we're helping and supporting in their roles. We've got aspiring young trustees who are young people that are interested in getting involved in a trustee board. We do a lot of work with charity boards, CEOs, senior leaders in charities to depending on who they are, to help them with one of three things. The first is we'll work with boards that really want to get young people on board. We help them with their recruitment process, their induction, and having a network of young people that might want to apply for their roles. We also help people that already have young people on their board and helping them to make sure that their processes and their experiences are inclusive. And then the third group, which is perhaps the hardest, are attempting to win the hearts and minds of those that maybe don't think they should or want to have young trustees on their board. And then on top of all of those people, we've also got lots of allies in the charity sector, but also outside of it with different employers that basically just believe in our mission and our vision. And our kind of core goal as a movement is to double the number of young trustees, so that's trustees under the age of 30 by 2024, and we're supported by the Social Change Agency to do that. So I'm coming to talk to you today a little bit about the movement, what we can do to help you, and also what we've learned in supporting and being young trustees ourselves. But first, a little bit about the national picture. So this is across the charity sector more broadly. I've got some statistics for you. 92% of trustees are white. One of the most ridiculous statistics is that 1 in 12 trustees are either called John or David. Fewer than 3% of trustees are under the age of 30, and fewer than 1% of trustees are under 25. So just for context, when we talk about young trustees, we mean anyone under the age of 30. 2/3 of trustees are men, and 75% of trustees have an income above the national average. And so if I'm being honest, the picture across the sector is reasonably dire in terms of diversity, and not just in age diversity, but also in relation to other types of identity. So that's what we look like nationally. And just a little bit of a, I guess, image that explains a bit about the young trustee movement and how we tackle diversity more generally is that obviously we recognise that our movement is focused on age and getting young people involved in boards, but nobody is ever just their age. Obviously, when people come into a room or a board, they're also bringing different elements of their identity with them. And so we recognise the need to take a holistic approach, to be more intersectional, and part of that is listening and learning from young trustees that are potentially, you know, Black women trustees or trustees with a disability that also happen to be young, and listening to their stories, but also finding ways to partner and learn from other organisations that are doing work, you know, potentially to get more women on trustee boards, for example. And I thought this was really important to mention because today I'm going to be talking a lot about age and young people, but when we're talking about this, we just need to consider and understand that there are obviously lots of other elements of identity that we have to consider in this conversation. So, starting off with some good news, here's a cute picture of a corgi as a congratulations. Of course, the caveat being, in student unions, we could have mature students as our sabbatical officers or as our student trustees who might not fit into that definition of a young trustee, but generally we're reasonably good at having young people involved in our organisations. So everyone can give themselves a pat on the back for that, because we are sector leading in terms of this stuff. You know, you look at them statistics, 1% under the age of 25, and I'd take hazard a guess that student unions are probably making up a pretty large chunk of that 1% with our sabbatical officers and our student trustees. And so we are seriously adding a huge amount of value to the young trustees movement and the charity sector more generally in having those voices on our boards, because they're already kind of built into our organisation and our practice. But not only that, we're also proof that young people can and are successful trustees, often leading, you know, multi-million-pound turnover charities, dealing with some really high-risk scenarios and being really good at it. And that's great. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about how we share that practice to the rest of the sector, and are kind of a beacon of how things can go really well when you've got young people engaged on your board. So that's really positive. And so that means we're winning, right, in terms of our engagement of young people on boards. And in all seriousness, yeah, like I said, we're seriously contributing to that statistic. It's already built into our practices. But as with any underrepresented group in society, being in the room is never enough. And so we might have lots of young people in our rooms and in our trustee boards, but that doesn't always mean that we're doing the best we can in terms of support and development and engagement while they're in those spaces. And so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the different pinch points across a young trustee's journey, what I perceive the kind of issues or things that we have to tackle as a sector, and how I think we can do better at supporting our young trustees. Because obviously I didn't come here today just to say how amazing we are, even though obviously I believe that. Another caveat is that when I was writing this presentation, I realised that writing for this audience is kind of tricky because there might be some sabbatical officers in the call. Well, I know there are, who are about to become young trustees. And for most of you, it will be the first time that you've been a young trustee or trustee in general. But there also might be senior managers and senior leaders that will be, and staff members that will be supporting your sabbatical officers and student trustees to engage on your board. So I hope that what I've pulled out will be of use to both of those categories of people. And just to say really that the information works both ways. So to all of the sabbatical officers on the call, the things that I'm recommending to your senior leaders, you can definitely and should go out and ask for those things to happen. And to the senior managers and any senior leaders, the things that I'm suggesting that young people use to help them on their journey, I would recommend signposting them to and kind of giving them a bit of a push of encouragement to go and make use of those resources. And finally, before I get started, this is by no means an exhaustive list. We're not going to solve support for young trustees today in an hour. I wish we could, but not going to be possible. But I hope it's a good start. And just to say, I'm really happy to carry this conversation on outside of this call. I'll leave my contact details at the end, and how you can get in contact with the Young Trustees movement in general, so that we can carry on having this conversation. So that was a very long introduction, but I'm skipping ahead. Here are the kind of 6 areas that I'm going to talk about today. So finding out about trusteeship and that it exists, recruitment or election, so however you select your trustees, the induction process, the first board meeting, actually being on the board and the experience of being on the board, and then also moving on from the board when you've finished being a trustee, which some of that stuff we're probably quite far away from being at that point, because lots of sabbatical officers will have just started their terms. But it's one to consider kind of baking in to that journey as you do some more work on supporting your young trustees in your organisations. So also to say, there's a lot of information on these slides, and I've also created a column of kind of resources, a bit of a checklist, and some questions you can ask yourself. So after this, I'm not sure how it'll happen. Hopefully we'll be able to circulate this out to you, so you'll be able to use all of the links and the resources that I've added into this. So first up, finding out about trusteeship. This is an area that I really think we underestimate a lot of the times, and not just in student unions, but across the sector. The first thing we talk about is recruitment. And of course, part of recruitment is telling people about the opportunity. But I think there's actually a step before that, which is letting people know that trusteeship exists, that it's a thing, that it's relevant to the student union, and that it's something that students can get involved in. So I guess one of the issues we have in the left-hand column are, according to research, only 1 in 10 young people can explain the role of a trustee. And I actually thought that was pretty high. I was kind of surprised by that statistic, because I don't know of many people that know about a trustee and what it does. But even so, 10% is still reasonably low. Another thing we need to tackle is that our students don't really know what we are in terms of our governance structures. And by that, I mean a charity. They definitely know what we do. Well, I hope they do anyway. And they know that we're the place that you join societies or sports, or maybe you get advice from. But they probably don't know that there's this overarching board that, makes the strategic decisions. And then if we have a student that knows that we have a trustee board and knows what a trustee is, we've still got a barrier in place, which is that they feel like that role is just not for them. And so they're not interested, well, it's not that they're not interested, but they're maybe not looking for those experiences, or if they have seen them, they're not applying for them because they think, oh, that's not for me, I don't have the experience. So here's some kind of practical tips, I guess, that I've pulled together of things that I think we can do to tackle that. The first is going out and talking to students. From my experience in student unions, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this across the next few slides, we are really good at going out and talking to our members. We go out, we talk to them at Freshers Fair, lots of us will have stalls in buildings, or we'll go out and talk in lectures. And we're really good when it comes to student opportunities. But when it comes to trusteeship, it seems that, we're just, no, we don't want to have that conversation. And it might just be, well, we put it on the website and there's a role description. But actually, I think one of the best things we can do in promoting trusteeship is just going out one-on-one, getting your officers or your staff members to go out and talk to people about the board, what we do, trusteeship in general, and how they can get involved not just in their student union, but in kind of wider charity sector. And that was my second point, is think about how you talk about trusteeship more broadly. So if you have a volunteer service, for example, or you encourage your students to volunteer, talking about trusteeship as a form of volunteering is really important, because it starts to embed that idea in the young people that we work with. Actually, this is the thing. Not only is it a thing, but it's a thing that is relevant to me and that I can engage in. And then the last one, and perhaps one of the most difficult, and there's definitely not enough time to dig into this properly, is ensuring your board looks like your student body. If your board is full of the people that match those statistics at the beginning of this presentation, if you've got lots of men, if you've got lots of white people, but your student body doesn't actually look like that, because our society and our communities don't look like that either, you need to think more broadly about that diversity. Because if I'm a student and I don't see anyone that looks like me in that space, I automatically think that that's not a space for me and I don't belong there. And like I said, we don't have enough time to delve into that today, but it's definitely something for boards to consider when they're talking to students about trusteeship. And then I've added a few questions that people can use to help have some of these discussions. So you've talked about trusteeship to your students, they know what it is, and they think, maybe I'll be interested in that. And so we get to recruitment or election, depending on your governance and how your student union works. So some of the problems I guess we have, if we keep saying it's boring, it's going to be boring. And if there's only one thing that people take away from watching this video, it's that this is a real problem. Often I hear people in the student union sector saying, oh, finance, budgeting, strategy, it's really boring, students don't care about it, it's not interesting. And we don't talk about any of our other opportunities like that. Nobody says, join the football team, it's really boring. And that's a bit of a silly example, because if you like football, it's obviously not boring. And I know this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, because I know you're not going out to your student body and saying, I've got this really boring opportunity that you should sign up for. But we do have to check the way we talk about things, even just internally, because that rubs off on our marketing. It rubs off on the way we talk to students. If you're excited by something and you can tell that story, students are far more likely to be engaged. Other things that I guess are kind of problems for us to overcome are, I've put here we might, but actually we definitely do have bias and stereotypes about who can and can't be a trustee. And obviously that relates to diversity. But when I wrote this, I wasn't just thinking about diversity in terms of kind of identity, but also in terms of courses, types of students. When I was a sabbatical officer, we would often say, oh, the nurses or the people in the medical school, they don't want to be trustees. They haven't got time. They're on placement. And that's true. They are on placement and they are busy, but it doesn't mean that they don't want to be trustees. And so we need to overcome some of that if we're going to be able to recruit and engage a wider range of students in what we do. What story are we telling students? That links to the first thing, but I hear a lot of people talk about, charity commission, regulation, lawyers, legality behind trusteeship, all of which things which are really important, obviously, if you're a trustee. But they're not the reason you do something. They're not the values that underpin why you become a trustee. They're just things that you have to know and you'll learn in training and are part of the job. And so rather than us going out and talking about, you'll be legally responsible, which is kind of scary actually, let's talk about what it actually means, because we know from research that the number one reason that young people want to be trustees is because they want to have an impact on their community. So we need to be telling that story more often about what our trustee boards do and how they have an impact on our community, because they do. And if they didn't, that would, it would be silly if they weren't doing that work. And so that, again, it links to the stop saying things are boring all the time, but think about how we're talking about these opportunities. More of a logistical thing, student unions quite literally have their own language. And I know we do because we all talk to each other using it. But a lot of the time we might use words that don't make sense or students haven't heard of in that context, and that can be a problem in terms of recruitment, because people read this document and they think, oh, I have no idea what any of that means, and when in reality there's no need for us to be using those words. And then another thing I guess for us to consider as kind of one of the potential barriers is often trusteeship across the sector is far more about who you know and not what you know. But in a student union context, this is kind of a tricky one, because you want a good balance between the two. Who you know are about your core student leadership, the people that you've developed and worked with over time to take on those leadership roles, not just as sabbatical officers, but maybe society leaders too. And they are the type of people that you want to get on your board. But I guess where we have to be careful is that we're not only engaging the engaged students already, and that we spend some time thinking about who are the other people that might want to be involved. So what can we do to solve all of those things? I know there's a lot of them. The first thing, stop saying it's boring. I should have called this talk that, because that's my key takeaway. Trusteeship isn't boring. It's interesting. It's exciting. And also something to consider with that is, who decides what young people find boring? In no other area in a student union would we treat our students as this kind of homogenous blob of people that all think and believe the same things. And so let's not make any assumptions about what people will and won't find boring. and let's talk about trusteeship like it's exciting and it's something that people would want to do. Had actually a really interesting conversation with my manager who's on this call today, yesterday, about actually saying things are boring is a little bit of a power play as well. And we have to be careful of that, because in saying something's boring or uninteresting, you're implying that someone shouldn't care about it, they shouldn't spend time looking at it. But if you're saying, oh, this financial budget is really boring, you're kind of implying, oh, just, don't worry about that. And that is a bit of a power play. And actually, we should be saying, this is really important, and encouraging and supporting our young trustees to engage with it rather than putting them off. Another thing we should do is create space for challenging our bias. So whether you're on, like the recruitment panel, or you're preparing recruitment for student trustees, spend some time thinking, okay, are we implying that only students that do law should be our young trustees? And have those conversations together. More, I guess, practical advice: think about partnering up with your career service and also your academics. Something we've done really well at UCB this year in terms of our student leaders has been taking that kind of three-pronged approach to engagement and support. So we've got academics, support services, and then officers, all telling the same story. And in doing that, you're capturing people that listen to different people and have different relationships. But I'm not just talking, put it on the careers website or webpage. Think about maybe the events that you could do, or how becoming a young trustee could be added into curriculum. I know at UCB, our students have, they're called Graduate Advantage. They're sessions every week, and they're basically just about, their careers and the things they care about, and their skills development, and a little bit more of that soft skill stuff. And so think about how you can maybe add something about trusteeship into there. And then another thing we can do as we go through the recruitment process is offer informal conversations that genuinely feel informal. So think about maybe getting your officers to go and meet with people interested and have that kind of student to student conversation. Think about the space and the place that you have these conversations in, aka, maybe you don't have it in the CEO's office where everyone's wearing a suit, for example. And those things to some of us seem silly and they seem unimportant. But actually, it's all about power. And if we want to create spaces that people feel like they can just ask questions, they can feel at ease. I know when I was a sabbatical officer and I went into my first council meeting for the university, I walk into this room and it's very grand and everything's really ornate, and on the walls were just loads of pictures of old white men, like paintings. Everyone in the room was really dressed up, and I kind of walked into that space and thought, oh, this is not for me. I don't belong in a space like this. And sometimes I think as student unions, we can kind of adopt some of those traits that our parent institutions have. But we don't want that. We want spaces that our students feel comfortable in. So really think about even just the small things that can make someone feel more comfortable, maybe asking them where they want to meet, meeting in a coffee shop, are all kind of good ways that you can put someone at ease. Other things we can do in terms of recruitment: be open and explicit about making that process flexible. So if someone, has to have a conversation out of hours because they're looking after their kids in the day, make time for that. If they can't use a certain platform or they can't Zoom and they have to have a phone call, do that, but make sure that you're not only doing it, but you're being really explicit in your processes that, we will make adjustments to make this process inclusive. And then just the last bit is just making sure that your information is transparent and available, making sure that people can access a role description that is really easy to understand and doesn't contain loads of that student union language, is another good way that you can get people more engaged in your recruitment process. And again, I've added some questions that people could think about as they're starting to have these conversations. One of the best ones, I think, is, why would you want to be a trustee? You know, if you were applying, would you want to apply because you have to submit an annual return to the Charity Commission? Because I doubt it. I think you'd want to apply because you care about the values, the vision, the mission, and you believe in what the organisation is doing. And so we need to add more of that into our processes. Okay, next slide is about induction. This one, the blog that I've added from the Young Trustees movement, went up today, and it is, and if I do say so myself, not that I wrote it, but it is from the Young Trustee movement. It is an amazing resource. So would really encourage anyone that is thinking about their induction process to go and give that a read. I've pulled out some of the things, but obviously that is a little bit more in depth. So some of the issues or barriers that we need to overcome in terms of induction are that for some people and for some trustees, this will be the first time they've met a new trustee. You might be unsure of what training a trustee might need. And we know that there's kind of a pressure for induction to be good, because having a good induction process means that you'll get better, more well-rounded trustees. And then there's also trying to find the balance of giving them all the papers and no papers at all, which I've heard of charities doing both of those things. And I've heard of organisations giving kind of 10 years of minutes of meetings, which is actually not very helpful. But finding a good balance of how you can pass on some of that historical context of what you've been discussing in your board meetings. Good news is, again, there's lots of things that we can do to make this process more inclusive for our young trustees. The first is encouraging your board to reach out to new trustees. So getting every member of the board, it doesn't have to be a coffee. I mean, I know it's pretty difficult to meet face to face at the minute, but it could just be dropping them an email so that they feel that this isn't the first time they're meeting people and that they've begun to develop those relationships already. Bit of a shameless plug, but encourage your young trustees to join the Young Trustees movement. When I was a sabbatical officer and I was a trustee, there is nothing I would have liked more than a network of people that were having the same experience of me and were on their board and maybe struggling a bit with being a trustee for the first time. And the Young Trustee movement provides a space for us to come together that feels more informal. It's about peer-to-peer support. So definitely signpost them to that. And if you're a sabbatical officer on this call, definitely join. Help young trustees to identify areas that they may be interested in or want to develop. It doesn't have, your training and induction doesn't have to just be about, you know, here's legally what you need to know. Think about this as a development opportunity and what you can offer a young trustee in terms of their engagement. Something we always say at the Young Trustee movement and encourage people to do is take up opportunities on subcommittees, because often subcommittees feel a little bit less formal, and it gives you a chance to really deep dive into the organisation. So especially for student trustees, because I know SABs, you'll be working with the day-to-day stuff anyway, but especially for young trustees, really getting a chance to learn and champion a specific area of the organisation can be really helpful. Encourage trustees to join and sign up to relevant mailing lists. Something I think sometimes we fall short of a little bit is we see student union boards as really separate to the rest of the charity sector, and of course there are things that are very different. It's more uncommon to have employees on your board, for example, and sabbatical officers are obviously paid by the organisation. And there's a different dynamic in terms of our membership, but that doesn't mean we don't have anything to learn from the rest of the sector. And there are some really great mailing lists. I'm signed up to the Small Charities Coalition one, because I'm the trustee of a small charity, and I find that really helpful. It's great to hear what else is happening in the sector and hearing what other boards are doing. And so that's a good opportunity to provide something a bit more informal in induction that trustees can take on themselves and read up on what they're interested in. Create a pack of helpful information, so not years and years of minutes, but your strategy documents, information on the budget. And again, that blog post that I've linked there has a good checklist of the types of things that you might want to include in that pack. So I definitely give that a read. And then obviously training is a really obvious one, and having training sessions with organisations like NCBO is a really great shout. One thing I would say is that obviously training is an ongoing need, and it shouldn't be that you do one kind of induction to trusteeship training and that be it. There are actually loads of free training sessions that you can access from across the sector that you could encourage your student trustees or your sabbatical officers to attend. And that they can be really useful, and potentially you could share training with other student unions and start learning from each other. So, 1 second. Your first board meeting, I really feel like is another area that we don't talk enough about, because we often just leap to, oh, now you're on the board and this is what you're doing. But actually that first board meeting, that very specific time, is really important. Your new trustees have got no idea what to expect. So for sabbatical officers, they might not have been to their university council or senate yet, and so they might not have been in a formal meeting like that before. For your student trustees, it's even less likely that they'll have been in kind of a governing meeting like that before. And so they're just not really sure what's about to happen. And it is scary and nerve-wracking. So just bear that in mind. But for new trustees, it's also the first impression they're going to get of your board. And so it's got to be good. There's a bit of pressure there for it to make sure that meeting is good and valuable, and they feel like they belong in that first kind of instance. Another issue we've got is that everything's an acronym, and that's not just for student unions, but across the sector, everyone talks in acronyms. And it can be really hard actually when you're in a meeting for the first time and everyone's talking in letters, you're not really sure what they're saying. And I've also added in-jokes to here, and I don't mean that in a bad thing, because I think in-jokes are definitely about who you are as a community. But when people are laughing about what happened in the last meeting, you can kind of feel a bit like, oh, I'm definitely new here. So some things we can do in our first meetings to make them good and support our young trustees are offer shadowing opportunities or board observations before the first meeting. And that can actually be part of the recruitment process and the induction process. So give them a chance to get a feel of what it's like. Offer pre-meetings to discuss paperwork, but not in a way that feels like, I need to meet with you because I don't think you've read the papers, and more in a like, let's have a chat about this. I'd love to get your opinion on what you think about this paper, for example. Really basic one, create an acronym list, make sure it's attached to every board pack. Meet outside your board to develop relationships as trustees. If you were in a staff team, you would have team building, and I don't just mean board away days, although they're really important. Often you'll be talking about strategy and strategic development. I'm actually just kind of talking, maybe not quite a pint, but going for a coffee, finding out about what other trustees care about, what's important to them. Something we did on my board recently was we each had a photo and we had 60 seconds to talk about it, and we got to pick what the photo was. And so people were talking about their kids, their trip to Kenya, kind of everything. And having some of that just makes you connect as people, which is really important as a board, and it can make people feel more welcome and at ease. Also create space to ask questions before the meeting, during the meeting, after the meeting, making sure that people know that no question is silly. And again, I've added some questions there that you can consider. One thing I think is really important is what your boardroom feels like. And that links to what I said before about making sure that it feels comfortable and welcoming to all of the people on your board. So being on the board, you've got loads of hats. That's a problem, or a barrier that people have to overcome. Sometimes their behaviour can make people feel like they're not welcome or they're not listened to. Trustees might struggle to understand historical decisions. People might feel embarrassed to ask questions. If a trustee has reasonable adjustments that they've asked for and they're not met, that can be really difficult for people. Expenses, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. And trustees really just need support in their confidence to challenge how things have always been, because it can be hard when you've never met anyone before and you go into the room for the first time, but you've got a difficult question about the budget. And so finding ways to support that and help those people engage is really important. Some things we can do: have really open and frank conversations about your hats. Again, something that Sarah and I have chatted about before is that actually this hats analogy is almost not helpful, because when you walk into a trustee board, you don't suddenly shed all of your other identities. And so while it's really important for our sabbatical officers to go in that space and act as trustees of the charity, we can't deny that they are also sabbatical officers at the same time. And so something Sarah has used before that I really like is this idea that actually it's hats, sunglasses, necklace. It's wearing lots of different things all at once, but finding how to manage them. And I actually really struggled with this when I was a sabbatical officer, but I wasn't given the space to talk about why I was struggling. And that's really important. And I'd really encourage that to be something that you embed really thoroughly, especially with your sabbatical officers. Make sure that you're doing the behaviours that you expect of the young people in your room. So call out behaviours if they're not welcoming, but also ask questions yourself. So in you calling things out and you asking questions, you're also, showing young people that they can do that too. Be flexible and make adjustments kind of as and when you need to. Someone also from the Young Trustees movement was telling me that one of his trustees on his board brings her daughter or her child to her trustee meetings. And for him and for their board, that wasn't, out of the ordinary. It was just a way that she was able to then come and engage. And so she brings her toys and her books and she kind of sits in the corner while they have these discussions. And I actually think that's really powerful. And it doesn't have to be, childcare, although it can be if any of your trustees have got children and you can support with that. Whatever that adjustment is, find a way to make it so that person can engage in that meeting. Just on expenses, this one is much more of a process thing, but is really important. If you have an expenses policy, make sure people claim their expenses. To be the only person in a room that's claiming expenses can be really difficult, and it kind of outs you as someone that might be, struggling to access money or struggling with their finances. And so if you create a culture where everyone just does their expenses claims, and maybe even in meetings, if someone's got the train down and you say, make sure you claim that back on expenses, I'll help with the form at the end, it gives a signal to other people that that's okay. And that's really important. As I said before, making time to develop your relationships as a board. And then mentorship, which again, I don't have enough time to go fully into, but you could partner up young trustees with lay trustees, or as a sector, we could think about how we support each other's boards. And, the CEO of one organisation might want to offer mentoring to another organisation, sabbatical officers, and vice versa. And so that's something that we can do to help people have those spaces to ask questions. And then the last one is when our officers are moving on from the board, as a wider charity sector, of course, we want to keep those people in the sector. You know, they're trained, they're well developed, they're, you know, sabbatical officers are amazing people, and we want to keep them around. But if a sabbatical officer has had a bad experience, how do we make sure that they want to do it again? I know lots of sabbatical officers that have gone on to be the lay trustees of other student union boards. So how do we keep them? And if I've had a good experience, but I only know student unions, I want to try a different sector, how do we support that? So some things we can do are offering help with applications and interviews. Something I think is really important is providing a space for your outgoing officers or outgoing student trustees to reflect on their experience and talk about how it went, how they were made to feel, so that you can listen and learn from that experience. I actually resigned as a trustee when I was a sabbatical officer. Anyone that knows me will have heard this story lots of times. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs, but I wasn't actually given that reflection in that space, and that's really difficult actually. And Asara yesterday was talking in the anti-racist trustee board about her experience of racism on a trustee board, and actually it's so important that we're able to listen and learn when we haven't been able to be as good as we can be, so that we can continue to develop ourselves. Again, a shameless plug, signpost to the Young Trustees movement. Encourage them to find out new opportunities from us so that we can support them to stay in the sector. And then also spend time reflecting after each meeting with your trustees to think about what went well, what didn't go well, how were people made to feel in that space. There's actually a blog there that was written by a sabbatical officer about their time as a trustee and how they stuck around in the sector afterwards. So definitely give that a read. So if you're feeling like this, which I am a little bit now, you might be really tired because this work is hard. It's definitely not easy and it takes time and it's about culture shift. However, as I said at the beginning, we are sector leading and, you know, we really do have the power to lead the way in terms of other charities and the movement in general to hear young people. So if when you're done all of your internal stuff, you want to find out how you can support the movement more generally and the sector, I've got this handy list of actions of things you can take away from today and do as individuals to better support young people in being trustees. So you can pledge your support to the Young Trustees movement. You can do that online. You can join and share best practice on the Digital Hub, which is our kind of online space where we share resources, we ask questions, we have events, and you could share in a webinar, a blog, a podcast, any of those things. So if you're interested in any of that, do get in contact with me and I can arrange that with the Young Trustees movement. Share your stories on social media to your members and the rest of the sector about how amazing your young trustees are. You could, as I said before, think about mentoring an aspiring young trustee or a current young trustee, and potentially we could look at as a sector, how do student unions share that mentoring experience so that they have someone external to their organisation. You could create and host support groups for trustees in similar charities. I was saying to John at the beginning, something that we're really good at as a movement in terms of the student movement is sharing best practice, chatting to each other, you know, having our communities of practice with NUS, all of those things. But something I've noticed a gap in relation to is our trustee board and our trusteeship. So maybe we could come together and create some of those groups to share practice. And then to any of our sabbatical officers that are on the call or other young trustees in general, you can become a champion of the movement. And that kind of does what it says on the tin. It's about championing what we do. Some things that champions have done so far have been writing to boards, writing to employers, helping to map and collate data on the picture of what young trusteeship looks like in your region, and also working to inspire other young people to get involved. So there's quite a big list of calls to action, and I'd encourage you to think about how you can do at least one of those things to help support young people in a wider sense in terms of their engagement. But good news, and one last dog, you're not on your own with this. And as I said, as a sector, we're pretty good at coming together and learning from each other. And I think we have to carry that on in relation to trusteeship too. But you're also not on your own, because you have the Young Trustees movement, and we're really excited and invested and dedicated to supporting student unions. So here's some ways that we can help you in helping your officers and your young trustees to engage on your board. The first thing is join the digital hub. As I said before, this space is where we come together as a community and we share best practice. You can ask questions. You don't have to be a young trustee to join. You can just be an ally to the movement, or you could be like a chief exec or a board chair that wanted to support young trustees. And there's lots of other people like that on there too. So I'd really, really encourage you to join, and I'll send around the link of how you can do that. As you know, I'm an ambassador for the East Midlands, but we have ambassadors across England and Wales. So there will be an ambassador in your region. You might notice there are some student union faces, not just mine, on this list of people. And you can contact your ambassador and see how they can support you. But anyone that's in the East Midlands, happy to meet for a coffee, chat to your board, chat to your young trustees, chat to your officers, basically anything I can do to help in the East Midlands. And I'm sure it's the same across the country in the different regions. So if you want to get in contact with any of those people or find out who's the ambassador for your region, just drop me a message and I can put you in contact. And one of the last things is that we can help you start these conversations. We've got lots of resources, and we've actually pulled together resources from across the sector, not just kind of the Young Trustees movement, but different organisations, and we've pulled them together in one place on the digital hub and also on our website. So definitely make use of that stuff that already exists. And that's it. Thank you so much for letting me come and talk to you today. It's pretty exciting for me because it is kind of a link between my day job and the stuff I do outside of work. So I've left my contact details, so you can contact me on the Young Trustees Movement email or on my work email. You can also find me and the Young Trustees Movement on Twitter. We talk about young trustees and trustee boards in general quite a lot on Twitter, so there's lots of ways you can get in contact if you want to ask any questions. But yeah, that is it for me.
Cassie, we do have a question for you from Dia, who feels that they're constantly undermined due to age, and that happens with other younger trustees. How do you tackle this?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think it really depends on the scenario and the situation. I think having a conversation with your board chair is a really good start. Trying to have that informal conversation, letting them know how you feel and how you're being made to feel in that space, because ultimately the chair of your board is there to kind of lead that culture change. Although I know that can be really difficult in student unions in particular, because young trustees may also be the chair of those spaces. Call it out as and when you can, and encourage your other board members that are potentially not young trustees to maybe come along to some events of the Young Trustee movement to hear from other people in the sector, and kind of linking them up with people that do it really well so that they can learn from other people, is what I'd say. Ooh, I'm just going to stop sharing. That makes it a little bit easier. Okay.
think Dio's also said if there's a problem with the chair, then I think that's more of a fundamental governance problem.
Yeah.
If it's everyone over 25, then I'd suggest maybe writing a statement as a group. You know, get some more people to back you up, and then take that to the chair and deputy chair. It may be that they just don't realise. I don't think many people, especially in student unions, you know, try and not be nice. It's just often they don't realise they're doing that. But
I think as well it links to what I was saying about like behaviors and not realizing that they make people uncomfortable. You know, those power structures are in place because that's, you know, how society works, and so it might be that they need some space to unpack some of that and their how they're making you feel.
Massive thank you to Cassie for that session. Please do check out the last few sessions that are on the rest of the day, in particular anyone who's involved in supporting student officers or is a student officer and has had a review themselves. We've got a new session at 3 o'clock today, which is an organisation who've done over 100 officer reviews, and they pulled all that information together. So if you're interested in how officers work within a students' union, whether that's as trustees or officers, that could be a really interesting session. So just a bit of a plug for that one. Also on studentunions.co.uk, you can find recordings of nearly all of the previous sessions. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you to Cassie again. Bye-bye.